The Pilgrim's Progress, Part 2, Chapter 7. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Pilgrim's Progress, by John Bunyan, Part 2, Chapter 7. Entertained by Gaius. Christiana then wished for an inn for herself and her children, because they were weary. Then said Mr. Honest,
There is one a little before us, where a very honourable disciple, one Gaius, dwells.
So they all concluded to turn in thither, and the rather because the old gentleman gave him so good a report. When they came to the door, they went in, not knocking, for folks used not to knock at the door of an inn. Then they called for the master of the house, and he came to them. So they asked if they might lie there that night.
Yes, gentlemen, if you be true men, for my house is for none but pilgrims.
Then were Christiana, Mercy, and the boys the more glad, for that the innkeeper was a lover of pilgrims. So they called for rooms, and he showed them one for Christiana and her children and Mercy, and another for Great-Heart and the old gentleman.
Good Gaius, what hast thou for supper? For these pilgrims have come far to-day, and are weary.
It is late, so we could not conveniently go out to seek food, but such as we have you shall be welcome to, if that will content.
We will be content with what thou hast in the house, for as much as I have proved thee, thou art never without that which is suitable.
Then he went down and spake to the cook, whose name was Taste that which is good, to get ready supper for so many pilgrims. This done, he came up again, saying,
Come, my good friends, you are welcome to me, and I am glad that I have a house to entertain you in. And while supper is making ready, if you please, let us entertain one another with some good talking together.
So they all said,
Content.
Whose wife is this aged matron, and whose daughter is this young damsel?
The woman is the wife of one Christian, a pilgrim of former times, and these are his 4 children. The maid is one of her acquaintance, one that she hath persuaded to come with her on pilgrimage. The boys take all after their father, and wish to tread in his steps. Yea, if they do but see any place where the old pilgrim hath lain, or any print of his foot, it bringeth joy to their hearts, and they are eager to lie or tread in the same.
Is this Christian's wife, and are these Christian's children? I knew your husband's father, yea, also his father's father. Many have been good of this stock. Their ancestors dwelt first at Antioch. Christian's ancestors, the early fathers from whom he came, I suppose you have heard your husband talk of them, were very worthy men. They have, above any that I know, showed themselves men of great virtue and courage, for the Lord of Pilgrims, his ways, and them that loved him. I have heard of many of your husband's relations, that have stood all trials for the sake of the truth. Stephen, who was one of the first of the family from whence your husband sprang, was knocked on the head with stones. James, another of this generation, was slain with the edge of the sword. To say nothing of Peter and Paul, men anciently of the family from whence your husband came, there was Ignatius, who was cast to the lions, Romanus, whose flesh was cut by pieces from his bones, and Polycarp, that played the man in the fire. There was he that was hanged up in a basket in the sun for the wasps to eat, and he whom they put into a sack and cast him into the sea to be drowned. It would be utterly impossible to count up all of that family who have suffered injuries and death for the love of a pilgrim's life, nor can I but be glad to see that thy husband has left behind him 4 such boys as these. I hope they will bear out their father's name, and tread in their father's steps, and come to their father's end.
Indeed, sir, they are likely lads. They seem to choose heartily their father's ways.
That is it that I said. Wherefore Christian's family is like still to spread abroad upon the face of the ground, and yet to be numerous upon the face of the earth. Wherefore let Christiana look out some damsels for her sons, to whom they may be married, etc., that the name of their father and the house of his family may never be forgotten in the world.
'Tis pity this family should fall and die out of the world.
Fall it cannot, but be diminished it may. But let Christiana take my advice, and that is the way to uphold it. And Christiana,
said this innkeeper.
I am glad to see thee and thy friend Mercy together here, a lovely couple, and may I advise, take Mercy into a nearer relation to thee. If she will, let her be given to Matthew, thy eldest son. It is the way to give you a family in the earth.
So this match was arranged, and in process of time they were married. But more of that hereafter. Gaius also proceeded, and said,
I will now speak on the behalf of women, to take away their reproach. For as death and the curse came into the world by a woman, so also did life and health. God sent forth his Son, born of a woman. I will say again, that when the Saviour was come, women rejoiced in him before either man or angel. I read not that man ever gave unto Christ so much as 1 penny, but the women followed him, and ministered to him of their substance. 'Twas a woman that washed his feet with tears, and a woman that anointed his body to the burial. There were women that wept when he was going to the cross, and women that followed him from the cross, and that sat over against the sepulchre when he was buried. There were women that were first with him at his resurrection morn, and women that brought tidings first to his disciples that he was risen from the dead. Women therefore are highly favoured, and show by these things that they are sharers with us in the grace of life.
Now the cook sent up to signify that supper was almost ready, and sent one to lay the cloth, the dishes, and to set the salt and bread in order. Then said Matthew,
The sight of this cloth and of this forerunner of the supper awaketh in me a greater appetite to my food than I had before.
So let all teaching truth to thee in this life awaken in thee a greater desire to sit at the supper of the great King in his kingdom. For all preaching, books, and services here are but as the laying of dishes, and as setting of salt upon the board, when compared with the feast which our Lord will make for us when we come to his house.
So supper came up, and first a heave-shoulder and a wave-breast were set on the table before them to show that they must begin their meal with prayer and praise to God. The heave-shoulder David lifted up his heart to God with, and with the wave-breast, where his heart lay, he used to lean upon his harp when he played. These 2 dishes were very fresh and good, and they all ate heartily well thereof. The next they brought up was a bottle of wine, red as blood. So Gaius said to them,
Drink freely. This is the true juice of the vine, that makes glad the heart of God and man.
So they drank and were merry. The next was a dish of milk, well crumbed. But Gaius said,
Let the boys have that they may grow thereby.
Then they brought up in course a dish of butter and honey. Then said Gaius,
Eat freely of this, for this is good to cheer up and strengthen your judgments and understandings. This was our Lord's dish when he was a child. Butter and honey shall he eat, that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good.
Then they brought them a dish of apples, and they were very good tasted fruit. Then said Matthew,
May we eat apples, since they were such bind with which the serpent deceived our first mother Eve?
Then said Gaius,
Apples were they with which we were beguiled. Yet sin, not apples, hath our souls defiled. Apples forbid, if ate, corrupt the blood. To eat such, when commanded, does us good. Drink of his flagons then, thou church, his dove, and eat his apples, who are sick of love.
Then said Matthew,
I made the objection because I a while since was sick with eating of fruit.
Forbidden fruit will make you sick, but not what our Lord has allowed.
While they were thus talking, they were presented with another dish, and it was a dish of nuts. Then said some at the table,
Nuts spoil tender teeth, especially the teeth of children.
Which when Gaius heard, he said,
Hard texts are nuts, I will not call them cheaters, whose shells do keep their kernels from the eaters. Ope then the shells, and you shall have the meat. They here are brought for you to crack and eat.
Then they were very merry, and sat at the table a long time, talking of many things. Then said the old gentleman,
My good landlord, while we were cracking your nuts, if you please, do you open this riddle. A man there was, though some did count him mad, The more he cast away, the more he had.
Then they all gave good heed, wondering what good Gaius would say. So he sat still a while, and then thus replied,
He that bestows his goods upon the poor shall have as much again, and 10 times more.
Then said Joseph,
I dare say, sir, I do not think you could have found it out.
Oh,
said Gaius,
I have been trained up in this way a great while. Nothing teaches like experience. I have learned of my Lord to be kind, and have found by experience that I have gained thereby. There is that scattereth and yet increaseth, and there is that withholdeth more than is meet, but it tendeth to poverty. There is that maketh himself rich, yet hath nothing. There is that maketh himself poor, yet hath great riches.
Then Samuel whispered to Christiana his mother, and said,
Mother, this is a very good man's house. Let us stay here a good while, and let my brother Matthew be married here to Mercy before we go any farther.
The which Gaius, the host, overhearing, said,
With a very good will, my child.
So they stayed there more than a month, and Mercy was given to Matthew to wife. While they stayed there, Mercy, as her custom was, would be making coats and garments to give to the poor, by which she brought up a very good report upon the Pilgrims. But to return again to our story, after supper the lads desired a bed, for that they were weary with travelling. Then Gaius called to show them their chamber, but, said Mercy,
I will have them to bed.
So she had them to bed, and they slept well. But the rest sat up all night, for Gaius and they were such suitable company that they could not tell how to part. Then, after much talk of their lord, themselves, and their journey, old Mr. Honest, he that put forth the riddle to Gaius, began to nod. Then said Great-Heart,
What, sir? You begin to be drowsy? Come, rub up. Now, here's a riddle for you.
Then said Mr. Honest.
Let us hear it.
Then said Mr. Great-Heart,
He that will kill must first be overcome. Who live abroad would first must die at home.
Ha!
said Mr. Honest.
It is a hard one, hard to explain, and harder to do. But come, landlord,
said he,
I will, if you please, leave my part to you. Do you expound it, and I will hear what you say.
No,
said Gaius.
it was put to you, and it is expected you should answer it.
Then said the old gentleman,
He first by grace must conquered be, that sin would mortify, and who that lives would convince me, unto himself must die.
Thus they sat talking till break of day. Now, when the family were up, Christiana bade her son James read a chapter. So he read the 53rd of Isaiah.
Well,
said Gaius,
now you are here, and since, as I know, Mr. Great-Heart is good at his weapons, if you please, after we have refreshed ourselves, we will walk into the fields to see if we can do any good. About a mile from hence there is one Slaygood, a giant, that doth much annoy the king's highway in these parts, and I know whereabout his haunt is. He is master of a number of thieves. 'Twould be well if we could clear these parts of him.
So they consented and went. Mr. Great-Heart with his sword, helmet, and shield, and the rest with spears and staves. When they were come to the place where he was, they found him with one feeble-minded in his hands, whom his servants had brought unto him, having taken him in the way. Now the giant was picking his pockets, with a purpose after that to pick his bones, for he was of the nature of flesh-eaters. Well, so soon as they saw Mr. Great-Heart and his friends at the mouth of his cave with their weapons, he demanded what they wanted.
We want thee, for we are come to revenge the quarrel of the many that thou hast slain of the Pilgrims, when thou hast dragged them out of the king's highway. Wherefore come out of thy cave.
So he armed himself and came out, and to battle they went, and fought for above an hour, and then stood still to take wind. Then said the giant,
Why are you here, on my ground?
To revenge the blood of pilgrims, as I told thee before.
So they went to it again, and the giant made Mr. Great-Heart give back. But he came up again, and in the greatness of his mind he let fly with such stoutness at the giant's head and sides, that he made him let his weapon fall out of his hand. So he smote him, and slew him, and cut off his head, and brought it away to the inn. He also took Feeble-mind, the pilgrim, and brought him with him to his lodgings. When they were come home, they showed his head to the family, and then set it up as they had done others before, for a terror to those that should attempt to do as he hereafter. Then they asked Mr. Feeble-mind how he fell into his hands. Then said the poor man,
I am a sickly man, as you can see, and because death did usually once a day knock at my door, I thought I should never be well at home. So I betook myself to a pilgrim's life, and have travelled hither from the town of Uncertain, where I and my father were born. I am a man of no strength at all of body, nor yet of mind, but would, if I could, though I can but crawl, spend my life in the pilgrim's way. When I came at the gate that is at the head of the way, the lord of that place did entertain me freely, neither objected he against my weakly looks, nor against my feeble mind, but gave me such things as were necessary for my journey, and bid me hope to the end. When I came to the house of the interpreter, I received much kindness there, and because the hill difficulty was judged too hard for me, I was carried up that one by one of his servants. Indeed, I have found much relief from pilgrims, though none were willing to go so softly as I am forced to do, yet still as they come on, they bid me be of good cheer, and said that it was the will of their Lord that comfort should be given to the feeble-minded, and so went on their own pace. When I was come to Assault Lane, then this giant met with me, and bid me prepare for an encounter. But alas, feeble one that I was, I had more need of a cordial. So he came up and took me. I believed not that he should kill me. So when he got me into his den, since I was not with him willingly, I believed I should come out alive again, for I have heard that not any pilgrim that is taken captive by violent hands, if he keeps heart whole towards his master, is, by the laws of Providence, to die by the hands of the enemy. Robbed I looked to be, and robbed to be sure I am, but I have, as you see, escaped with life, for the which I thank my King as the author, and you as the means. Other brunts I also look for, but this I have resolved on, to wit, to run when I can, to go when I cannot run, and to creep when I cannot go. As to the principal thing, I thank him that loves me, I am fixed. My way is before me, my mind is beyond the river that has no bridge, though I am, as you see, but of a feeble mind.
Then said old Mr. Honest,
Have not you some time ago been acquainted with one Mr. Fearing, a pilgrim?
Acquainted with him? Yes, he came from the town of Stupidity, which lies 4 degrees northward of the city of Destruction, and as many off of where I was born. Yet we were well acquainted, for indeed he was my uncle, my father's brother. He and I have been much of a temper. He was a little shorter than I, but yet we were much of a complexion.
I perceive you know him, and I am apt to believe also that you are related one to another, for you have his whitely look, a cast like his with your eye, and your speech is much alike.
Most have said so that have known us both, and besides, what I have read in him I have for the most part found in myself.
Come, sir,
said good Gaius.
Be of good cheer. You are welcome to me and to my house. What thou hast a mind to, call for freely, and what thou wouldst have my servants do for thee, they will do it with a ready mind.
Then said Mr. Feeble-mind,
This is an unexpected favour, and as the sun shining out of a very dark cloud. Did Giant Slaygood intend me this favour when he stopped me, and resolved to let me go no farther? Did he intend that, after he had rifled my pockets, I should go to Gaius, mine host? Yet so it is.
Now, just as Feeble-mind and Gaius were thus in talk, there came one running, and called at the door, and said, that about a mile and a half off there was one Mr. Not Right, a pilgrim, struck dead upon the place where he was with a thunderbolt.
Alas,
said Mr. Feeble-Mind.
Is he slain? He overtook me some days before I came so far as hither, and would be my company-keeper. He also was with me when Slaygood, the giant, took me, but he was nimble of his heels, and escaped. But it seems he escaped to die, and I was taken to live. What, one would think, doth seek to slay outright, oft-times delivers from the saddest plight, that very Providence, whose face is death, doth oft-times to the lowly life bequeath. I was taken, he did escape and flee. Hands crossed gives death to him, and life to me.
Now about this time Matthew and Mercy were married. Also Gaius gave his daughter Phoebe to James, Matthew's brother, to wife. After which time they yet stayed about 10 days at Gaius's house, spending their time and the seasons like as pilgrims used to do. When they were about to depart, Gaius made them a feast, and they did eat and drink and were merry. Now the hour was come that they must be gone, wherefore Mr. Great-Heart called for the bill of charges. But Gaius told him that at his house it was not the custom of pilgrims to pay for their entertainment. He boarded them by the year, but looked for his pay from the Good Samaritan, who had promised him, at his return, whatsoever charge he was at with them, faithfully to repay him. Then said Mr. Great-Heart to him,
Beloved, thou doest faithfully, whatsoever thou doest to the brethren and to strangers, which have borne witness of thy liberal giving before the church, whom if thou yet bring forward on their journey after a godly sort, thou shalt do well.
Then Gaius took his leave of them all, and his children, and particularly of Mr. Feeble-Mind. He also gave them something to drink by the way. Now Mr. Feeble-Mind, when they were going out of the door, made as if he intended to linger. The which, when Mr. Great-Heart espied, he said,
Come, Mr. Feeble-Mind, pray do you go along with us. I will be your conductor, and you shall fare as the rest.
Alas, I want a suitable companion. You are all lusty and strong, but I, as you see, am weak. I choose therefore rather to come behind, lest, by reason of my many weaknesses, I should be both a burden to myself and to you. I am, as I said, a man of a weak and feeble mind, and shall be injured and made weak at that which others can bear. I shall like no laughing. I shall like no gay attire. I shall like no unprofitable questions. Nay, I am so weak a man as to be harmed with that which others have a liberty to do. I do not yet know all the truth. I am a very ignorant Christian man. Sometimes, if I hear any rejoice in the Lord, it troubles me, because I cannot do so too. It is with me as it is with a weak man among the strong, or with a sick man among the healthy, or as a lamp despised. He that is ready to slip with his feet is as a lamp despised in the thought of him that is at ease, so that I know not what to do.
But, brother,
said Mr. Great-Heart,
I have it in my work to comfort the feeble-minded and to support the weak. You must needs go along with us. We will wait for you. We will lend you our help. We will deny ourselves of some things for your sake. We will not enter into doubtful questions before you. We will be made all things to you, rather than you shall be left behind.
Now all this while they were at Gaius's door, and behold, as they were thus in the heat of their discourse, Mr. Ready-to-Halt came by, with his crutches in his hands, and he also was going on a pilgrimage. Then said Mr. Feeble-Mind to him,
How camest thou hither? I was but now complaining that I had not a suitable companion, but thou art according to my wish. Welcome, welcome, good Mr. Ready-to-Halt. I hope thou and I may be some help.
I shall be glad of thy company,
said the other.
And good Feeble-Mind, rather than we part, since we are happily thus met, I will lend thee one of my crutches.
Nay,
said he,
though I thank thee for thy good will, I am not inclined to halt before I am lame. Howbeit, I think, when occasion is, it may help me against a dog.
If either myself or my crutches can do thee a pleasure, we are both at thy command, good Feeble-Mind.
Thus, therefore, they went on. Mr. Great-Heart and Mr. Honest went before, Christiana and her children went next, and Mr. Feeble-Mind came behind, and Mr. Ready-to-Halt with his crutches. Then said Mr. Honest,
Pray, sir, now that we are upon the road, tell us some profitable things of some that have gone on pilgrimage before us.
With a good will. I suppose you have heard how Christian of old did meet with Apollyon in the valley of humiliation, and also what hard work he had to go through the valley of the shadow of death. Also I think you cannot but have heard how Faithful was put to it by Madam Wanton, with Adam the first, with one Discontent, and Shame, 4 as deceitful villains as a man can meet with upon the road.
Yes, I believe I have heard of all this, but indeed, good Faithful was hardest put to it with Shame. He was an unwearied one.
Ay, for, as the Pilgrim well said, he of all men had the wrong name.
But pray, sir, where was it that Christian and Faithful met Talkative? That same was also a notable one.
He was a confident fool, yet many follow his ways.
He had liked to have deceived Faithful.
Ay, but Christian put him into a way quickly to find him out.
Thus they went on till they came to the place where Evangelist met with Christian and Faithful, and foretold them what should befall them at Vanity Fair. Then said their guide,
Hereabouts did Christian and Faithful meet with Evangelist, who foretold them of their troubles which they should meet with at Vanity Fair.
Say you so? I dare say it was a hard chapter then, that he did read unto them.
It was, but he gave them encouragement withal. But what do we talk of them? They were a couple of lion-like men. They had set their faces like flint. Do not you remember how undaunted they were when they stood before the judge?
Well, Faithful bravely suffered.
So he did, and as brave things come on't. For Hopeful and some others, as the story relates it, were converted by his death.
Well, but pray go on, for you are well acquainted with things.
Above all that Christian met with after he had passed through Vanity Fair, one By-ends was the arch one.
By-ends? What was he?
A very arch fellow, a downright deceiver, one that would be religious, which way soever the world went, but so cunning that he would be sure never to lose or suffer for it. He had his mode of religion for every fresh occasion, and his wife was as good at it as he. And he would turn and change from opinion to opinion, yea, and plead for so doing too. But as far as I could learn, he came to an ill end with his by-ends, nor did I ever hear that any of his children were ever of any esteem with any that truly feared God.
Now, by this time they were come within sight of the town of Vanity, where Vanity Fair is kept. So, when they saw that they were so near the town, they consulted with one another how they should pass through the town, and some said one thing, and some another. At last Mr. Great-Heart said,
I have, as you may understand, often been a conductor of pilgrims through this town. Now, I am acquainted with one Mr. Mnason, a Cyprusian by nature, an old disciple, at whose house we may lodge, if you think good.
Said he.
We will turn in there.
Content,
said Old Honest.
Content,
said Christiana.
Content,
said Mr. Feeble-Mind, and so they said all. Now, you must think that it was eventide by that they got to the outside of the town. But Mr. Great-Heart knew the way to the old man's house, so thither they came, and he called at the door. And the old man within knew his tongue so soon as ever he heard it. So he opened the door, and they all came in. Then said Mnason, their host,
How far have you come today?
So they said,
From the house of Gaius, our friend.
I promise you,
said he,
you have come a good stitch. You may well be weary. Sit down.
So they sat down.
Come, what cheer, sirs? I dare say you are welcome to my friend.
I also,
said Mr. Mnason,
do bid you welcome, and whatever you want, do it say, and we'll do what we can to get it for you.
Our great want a while since was a resting place and good company, and now I hope we have both.
For resting place, you see what it is. For good company, that will appear in the trial.
Well,
said Great-Heart,
will you have the Pilgrims up into their lodging?
I will,
said Mr. Mnason. So he had them up to their several places, and also showed them a very fair dining-room, where they might be and sup together, until time should come to go to rest. Now, when they were set in their places, and were a little cheery after their journey, Mr. Honest asked his landlord if there were any store of good people in the town.
We have a few, for, indeed, they are but a few when compared to them on the other side.
But how shall we do to see some of them? For the sight of good men to them that are going on pilgrimage is like the appearing of the moon and stars to them that are sailing upon the seas.
Then Mr. Mnason stamped with his foot, and his daughter Grace came up. So he said unto her,
Grace, go you, tell my friends, Mr. Contrite, Mr. Holyman, Mr. Lovesaint, Mr. Dare Not Lie, and Mr. Penitent, that I have a friend or two at my house, who have a mind this evening to see them.
So Grace went to call them, and they came, and after salutation made, they sat down together at the table. Then said Mr. Mnason, their landlord,
My neighbours, I have, as you see, a company of strangers come to my house. They are pilgrims. They come from afar, and they are going to Mount Zion. But who,
quoth he,
do you think this is?
Pointing with his finger to Christiana.
It is Christiana, the wife of Christian, that famous pilgrim, who, with Faithful his brother, was so shamefully handled in our town.
At that they stood amazed, saying,
We little thought to see Christiana when Grace came to call us. Wherefore this is a very comfortable surprise.
They then asked her of her welfare, and if these young men were her husband's sons. And when she told them they were, they said,
The King whom you love and serve, make you as your father, and bring you where he is in peace.
Then Mr. Honest, when they had all sat down, asked Mr. Contrite and the rest in what posture their town was at present.
You may be sure we are full of hurry and fair time. 'Tis hard keeping our hearts and spirits in good order when we are in a cumbered condition. He that lives in such a place as this, and has to do with such as we have, has need of a hint to caution him to take heed every moment of the day.
But how are your neighbors for quietness?
They are much more moderate now than formerly. You know how Christian and Faithful were used at our town. But of late, I say, they have been far more moderate. I think the blood of Faithful lieth as a load upon them till now. For since they burned him, they have been ashamed to burn any more. In those days we were afraid to walk the street, but now we can show our heads. Then the name of a Christian was hated. Now, specially in some parts of town, for you know our town is large, religion is counted honourable.
Then said Mr. Contrite to them,
Pray, how fareth it with you in your pilgrimage? How stands the country towards you?
It happens to us as it happeneth to wayfaring men. Sometimes our way is clean, sometimes uphill, sometimes downhill. We are seldom at a certainty. The wind is not always on our back, nor is every one a friend that we meet with in the way. We have met with some notable rubs already, and what are yet behind we know not. But, for the most part, we find it true that has been talked of old. A good man must suffer trouble.
You talk of rubs. What rubs have you met withal?
Nay, ask Mr. Great-Heart, our guide, for he can give the best account of that.
We have been beset 3 or 4 times already. First, Christiana and her children were beset by 2 ruffians, who, they feared, would take away their lives. We were beset by giant Bloody Man, giant Maul, and giant Slaygood. Indeed, we did rather beset the last than were beset of him, and thus it was, after we had been some time at the house of Gaius mine host, and of the whole church. We were minded upon a time to take our weapons with us, and go and see if we could light upon any of those that were enemies to pilgrims, for we heard that there was a notable one thereabouts. Now Gaius knew his haunt better than I, because he dwelt thereabout. So we looked and looked, till at last we saw the mouth of his cave. Then we were glad and plucked up our spirits. So we approached up to his den, and lo, when we came there, he had dragged by mere force into his net this poor man, Mr. Feeble-Mind, and was about to bring him to his end. But when he saw us, supposing, as he thought, he had had another prey, he left the poor man in his house and came out. So we fell to it full sore, and he lustily laid about him, but, in conclusion, he was brought down to the ground, and his head cut off, and set up by the wayside, for terror to such as should after practice such ungodliness. That I tell you the truth. Here is the man himself to affirm it, who was as a lamb taken out of the mouth of the lion.
Then said Mr. Feeble-Mind,
I found this true, to my cost and comfort. To my cost, when he threatened to pick my bones every moment, and to my comfort, when I saw Mr. Great-Heart and his friends with their weapons approach so near for my deliverance.
Then said Mr. Holyman,
There are but two things they have need to possess who go on pilgrimage, courage and an unspotted life. If they have not courage, they can never hold on their way, and if their lives be loose, they will make the very name of the pilgrim stink.
Then said Mr. Lovesaint,
I hope this caution is not needful among you. But truly there are many that go upon the road, who rather declare themselves strangers to pilgrimage than strangers and pilgrims in the earth.
Then said Mr. Dare-not-lie,
'Tis true, they have neither the pilgrim's weed nor the pilgrim's courage. They go not uprightly, but all awry with their feet. One shoe goeth inward, another outward, and they are hosen out behind. There is here a rag, and there a rent, to the disparagement of their lord.
These things,
said Mr. Penitent,
they ought to be troubled for, nor are the pilgrims like to have that grace upon them, and their pilgrim's progress as they desire, until the way is cleared of such spots and blemishes.
Thus they sat, talking and spending the time until supper was set upon the table, unto which they went, and refreshed their weary bodies. So they went to rest. Now they stayed in this fare a great while at the house of Mnason, who, in the process of time, gave his daughter Grace unto Samuel, Christiana's son, to wife, and his daughter Martha to Joseph. The time, as I said, that they stayed here was long, for it was not now as in former times. Wherefore the pilgrims grew acquainted with many of the good people of the town, and did them what service they could. Mercy, as she was wont, laboured much for the poor, wherefore their bodies and backs blessed her, and she was there an ornament to her profession. And to say the truth, for Grace, Phoebe, and Martha, they were all of a very good nature, and did much good in their places. They were also all of them very fruitful, so that Christian's name, as was said before, was like to live in the world. While they lay there came a monster out of the woods, and slew many of the people of the town. It would also carry away their children, and teach them to suck its whelps. Now no man in the town durst so much as face this monster, but all fled when they heard the noise of his coming. The monster was like unto no one beast on the earth. Its body was like a dragon, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. It made great havoc of children, and yet it was governed by a woman. This monster gave conditions to men, and such men as loved their lives more than their souls accepted of those conditions. So they came under. Now this Mr. Great-Heart, together with those that came to visit the pilgrims at Mr. Mnason's house, entered into a covenant to go and engage this beast, if perhaps they might deliver the people of this town from the paws and mouth of this so devouring a serpent. Then did Mr. Great-Heart, Mr. Contrite, Mr. Holyman, Mr. Dare-not-lie, and Mr. Penitent, with their weapons, go forth to meet him. Now the monster was at first very rampant, and looked upon these enemies with great disdain. But they so belaboured him, being sturdy men-at-arms, that they made him make a retreat. So they came home to Mr. Mnason's house again. The monster, you must know, had his certain seasons to come out in, and to make his attempts upon the children of the people of the town. Also, these seasons did these valiant worthies watch him in, and did still continually assault him, insomuch that in process of time he became not only wounded, but lame. Also, he has not made that havoc of the town's children as formerly he had done, and it is verily believed by some that this beast will die of his wounds. This, therefore, made Mr. Great-Heart and his fellows of great fame in this town, so that many of the people that wanted their taste of things yet had a reverent esteem and respect for them. Upon this account, therefore, it was that these pilgrims got not much hurt here. True, there were some of the baser sort that could not see more than a mole, nor understand any more than a beast. These had no reverence for these men, and took no notice of their valour or adventures. Well, the time grew on that the pilgrims must go on their way, wherefore they prepared for their journey. They sent for their friends, they talked with them, they had some time set apart therein to commit each other to the protection of their prince. There were again that brought them of such things as they had, that were fit for the weak and the strong, for the women and the men, and so loaded them with such things as were necessary. Then they set forward on their way, and their friends accompanying them so far as was convenient, they again committed each other to the protection of their king, and parted. They, therefore, that were of the Pilgrims' company went on, and Mr. Great-Heart went before them. Now the women and children being weakly, they were forced to go as they could bear, by which means Mr. Ready-to-Halt and Mr. Feeble-Mind had more to sympathize with their condition. When they were gone from the townsmen, and when their friends had bid them farewell, they quickly came to the place where Faithful was put to death. There, therefore, they made a stand, and thanked him that had enabled him to bear his cross so well, and the rather, because they now found that they had a benefit by such manly suffering as his was. They went on, therefore, after this a good way farther, talking of Christian and Faithful, and how Hopeful joined himself to Christian after that Faithful was dead. Now they were come up with the hill Lucre, where the silver mine was which took Damus off from his pilgrimage, and into which, as some think, Bians fell and perished. Wherefore they considered that. But when they were come to the old monument that stood over against the hill Lucre, to wit, the pillar of salt, that stood also within view of Sodom and its stinking lake, they marvelled, as did Christian before, that men of that knowledge and ripeness of wit as they were should be so blind as to turn aside here. End of Part 2, Chapter 7. The Pilgrim's Progress, Part 2, Chapter 8. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Pilgrim's Progress, by John Bunyan, Part 2, Chapter 8, The Delectable Mountains and the Shepherds. I saw now that they went on till they came at the river that was on this side of the Delectable Mountains, to the river where the fine trees grow on both sides, and whose leaves, if taken inwardly, are good against sickness, where the meadows are green all the year long, and where they might lie down safely. By this riverside in the meadow there were cotes and folds for sheep, a house built for the nourishing and bringing up of those lambs, the babes of those women that go on the pilgrimage. Also there was here one that was entrusted with them, who could have pity, and that could gather these lambs with his arm, and carry them in his bosom, and that could gently lead those that were with young. Now to the care of this man Christiana admonished her 4 daughters to commit their little ones, that by these waters they might be housed, cared for, helped, and nourished, and that none of them might be lacking in time to come. This man, if any of them go astray or be lost, he will bring them again. He will also bind up that which was broken, and will strengthen them that are sick. Here they will never want food and drink and clothing. Here they will be kept from thieves and robbers. For this man will die before one of those committed to his trust shall be lost. Besides, here they shall be sure to have good nurture and training, and shall be taught to walk in right paths, and that, you know, is a favour of no small account. Also here, as you see, are delicate waters, pleasant meadows, dainty flowers, variety of trees, and such as bear wholesome fruit, fruit not like that Matthew ate of, that fell over the wall out of Beelzebub's garden, but fruit that giveth health where there is none, and that continueth and increaseth it where it is. So they were content to commit their little ones to him. And that which was also an encouragement for them so to do was, for that all this was to be at the charge of the king, and so was as an hospital for young children and orphans. Now they went on, and when they were come to Bypath Meadow, to the stile over which Christian went with his fellow hopeful, when they were taken by Giant Despair and put into Doubting Castle, they sat down and consulted what was best to be done. To wit, now they were so strong, and had got such a man as Great-Heart for their conductor, whether they had not best make an attempt upon the giant, demolish his castle, and, if there were any pilgrims in it, to set them at liberty, before they went any farther. So one said one thing, and another said the contrary. One questioned if it were lawful to go upon ground that was not the king's. Another said they might, providing their end was good. But Mr. Great-Heart said,
Though that reason given last cannot be always true, yet I have a commandment to resist sin, to overcome evil, to fight the good fight of faith. And I pray, with whom should I fight this good fight, if not with Giant Despair? I will therefore attempt the taking away of his life, and the demolishing of Doubting Castle.
Then said he,
Who will go with me?
Then said Old Honest,
I will.
And so will we, too.
Said Christiana's 4 sons, Matthew, Samuel, Joseph, and James, for they were young men and strong. So they left the women in the road, and with them Mr. Feeble and Mr. Ready-to-Halt with his crutches, to be their guard until they came back. For in that place, though Giant Despair dwelt so near, they, keeping in the road, a little child might lead them. So Mr. Great-Heart, Old Honest, and the 4 young men went to go up to Doubting Castle to look for Giant Despair. When they came at the castle gate, they knocked for entrance with an unusual noise. At that the old giant comes to the gate, and Diffidence his wife follows. Then said he,
Who and what is he that is so hardy as after this manner to disturb the Giant Despair?
Mr. Great-Heart replied,
It is I, Great-Heart, one of the king of the celestial country's conductors of pilgrims to their place, and I demand of thee that thou open thy gates for my entrance. Prepare thyself also to fight, for I am come to take away thy head, and to demolish Doubting Castle.
Now Giant Despair, because he was a giant, thought no man could overcome him, and again thought he,
Since heretofore I have made a conquest of angels, shall Great-Heart make me afraid?
So he harnessed himself with his armour and went out. He had a cap of steel upon his head, a breastplate of fire girded to him, and he came out in iron shoes, with a great club in his hand. Then these 6 men made up to him, and beset him behind and before. Also, when Diffidence, the giantess, came up to help him, old Mr. Honest cut her down at one blow. Then they fought for their lives, and Giant Despair was brought down to the ground, but was very loath to die. He struggled hard, and had, as they say, as many lives as a cat. But Great-Heart was his death, for he left him not till he had severed his head from his shoulders. Then they fell to demolishing Doubting Castle, and that, you know, might with ease be done, since Giant Despair was dead. They were 7 days in destroying of that, and in it, of pilgrims, they found one, Mr. Despondency, almost starved to death, and one much afraid, his daughter. These 2 they saved alive, but it would have made you wonder to have seen the dead bodies that lay here and there in the castle yard, and how full of dead men's bones the dungeon was. When Mr. Great-Heart and his companions had performed this great work, they took Mr. Despondency and his daughter much afraid into their care, for they were honest people, though they were prisoners in Doubting Castle to that tyrant, Giant Despair. They therefore, I say, took with them the head of the giant, for his body they had buried under a heap of stones, and down to the road and to their companions they came, and showed them what they had done. Now, when Feeble-Mind and Ready to Halt saw that it was the head of Giant Despair indeed, they were very jocund and merry. Now Christiana, if need was, could play upon the viol, and her daughter Mercy upon the lute. So, since they were so merry disposed, she played them a lesson, and Ready to Halt would dance. So he took Despondency's daughter Much Afraid by the hand, and to dancing they went in the road. True, he could not dance without one crutch in his hand, but I promise you he footed it well. Also the girl was to be commended, for she answered the music handsomely. As for Mr. Despondency, the music was not so much to him. He was for feeding rather than dancing, for that he was almost starved. So Christiana gave him some of her bottle of spirits for present relief, and then prepared him something to eat, and in a little time the old gentleman came to himself, and began to feel finely revived. Now I saw in my dream, when all these things were finished, Mr. Great-Heart took the head of Giant Despair, and set it upon a pole by the highway side, right over against the pillar that Christian erected for a caution to pilgrims that came after, to take heed of entering into his grounds. Then he writ under it, upon a marble stone, these verses following. This is the head of him whose name only in former times did pilgrims terrify. His castle's down, and Diffidence, his wife, brave Mr. Great-Heart has bereft of life. Despondency, his daughter, Much Afraid, Great-Heart for them also the man has played. Who hereof doubts, if he'll but cast his eye up hither, may his scruples satisfy. This head also, when doubting cripples dance, doth show from fears they have deliverance. When these men had thus bravely showed themselves against Doubting Castle, and had slain Giant Despair, they went forward and went on, till they came to the Delectable Mountains, where Christian and Hopeful refreshed themselves with the varieties of the place. They also acquainted themselves with the shepherds there, who welcomed them, as they had done Christian before, on to the Delectable Mountains. Now the shepherds, seeing so great a train follow Mr. Great-Heart, for with him they were well acquainted, they said unto him,
Good sir, you have got a goodly company here. Pray, where did you find all these?
Then Mr. Great-Heart replied,
First, here is Christiana and her train, her sons and her sons' wives, who, like the wain, keep by the pole, and do by compass steer from sin to grace, else they had not been here. Next here's old Honest, come on pilgrimage, Ready to Halt, too, who I dare engage true-hearted is, and so is Feeble-Mind, who willing was not to be left behind. Despondency, good man, is coming after, and so also is Much Afraid, his daughter. May we have entertainment here, or must we farther go? Let's know whereon to trust.
Then said the shepherds,
This is a comfortable company. You are welcome to us, for we have a care for the feeble as well as for the strong. Our prince has an eye to what is done, to the least of these. Therefore weakness must not be a block to our entertainment.
So they had them to the palace door, and then said unto them,
Come in, Mr. Feeble-Mind. Come in, Mr. Ready to Halt. Come in, Mr. Despondency, and Mrs. Much Afraid, his daughter. These, Mr. Great-Heart,
said the shepherds to the guide,
we call him by name, for that they are most subject to draw back. But as for you and the rest that are strong, we leave you to your wonted liberty.
Then said Mr. Great-Heart,
This day I see that grace doth shine in your faces, and that you are my Lord's shepherds indeed, for that you have not pushed these helpless ones, neither with side nor shoulder, but have rather strewed their way into the palace with flowers, as you should.
So the feeble and weak went in, and Mr. Great-Heart and the rest did follow. When they were also sat down, the shepherd said to those of the weaker sort,
"What is it that you would have? For,"
said they,
"all things must be managed here for the supporting of the weak, as well as the warning of the unruly."
So they made them a feast of things easy of digestion, and that were pleasant to the palates and nourishing. The which, when they had received, they went to their rest, each one separately unto his proper place. When the morning was come, because the mountains were nigh and the day clear, and because it was the custom of the shepherds to show the pilgrims before their departure some rarities, therefore, after they were ready and had refreshed themselves, the shepherds took them out into the fields, and showed them first what they had showed to Christian before. Then they had them to some new places. The first was Mount Marvel, where they looked and beheld a man at a distance that tumbled the hills about with words. Then they asked the shepherds what that should mean. So they told them that the man was the son of Mr. Great Grace, of whom you read in the first part of the records of the Pilgrim's Progress, and he is set down there to teach the pilgrims how to behave, or to tumble out of their ways what difficulties they should meet with by faith. Then said Mr. Great-Heart,
"I know him. He is a man above many."
Then they had them to another place, called Mount Innocent, and here they saw a man clothed all in white, and two men, Prejudice and Ill Will, continually casting dirt upon them. Now, behold, the dirt, whatsoever they cast at him, would in a little time fall off again, and his garment would look as clear as if no dirt had been cast thereat. Then said the pilgrims,
"What means this?"
The shepherds answered,
"This man is named Godly Man, and this garment is to show the innocency of his life. Now those that throw dirt at him are such as hate his well-doing. But as you see, the dirt will not stick upon his clothes. So it shall be with him that liveth truly innocently in the world. Whoever they be that would make such men dirty, they labour all in vain. For God, by that a little time is spent, will cause that their innocence shall break forth as the light, and their righteousness as the noonday."
Then they took them and had them to Mount Charity, where they showed them a man that had a bundle of cloth lying before him, out of which he took coats and garments for the poor that stood about him. Yet his bundle or roll of cloth was nevertheless. Then said they,
What should this be?
"This is,"
said the shepherds,
"to show you that he who has a heart to give of his labour to the poor shall never want wherewithal. He that watereth shall be watered himself, and the cake that the widow gave to the prophet did not cause that she had ever the less in her barrel."
They had them also to a place where they saw one fool and one want-wit washing of an Ethiopian, with intention to make him white. But the more they washed him, the blacker he was. Then they asked the shepherds what that should mean. So they told them, saying,
"Thus shall it be with the vile person. All means used to get such an one a good name shall, in the end, tend but to make him more abominable. Thus it was with the Pharisees, and so it shall be with all pretenders to religion."
Then said Mercy, the wife of Matthew, to Christiana her mother,
Mother, I would, if it might be, see the hole in the hill, or that commonly called the byway to hell.
So her mother brake her mind to the shepherds. Then they went to the door. It was in the side of a hill, and they opened it, and bid Mercy hearken a while. So she hearkened, and heard one saying,
Cursed be my father for holding of my feet back from the way of peace and life.
And another said,
Oh, that I had been torn in pieces before I had, to save my life, lost my soul.
And another said,
If I were to live again, how I would deny myself, rather than come to this place.
Then there was as if the very earth groaned and quaked under the feet of this young woman for fear. So she looked white, and came trembling away, saying,
Blessed be he and she that are delivered from this place.
Now, when the shepherds had shown them all these things, they had them back to the palace, and entertained them with what the house would afford. But Mercy longed for something that she saw there, but was ashamed to ask. Her mother-in-law then asked her what she ailed, for she looked as one not well. Then said Mercy,
"There is a looking-glass hangs up in the dining-room, off of which I cannot take my mind. If therefore I have it not, I think I shall be unhappy."
Then said her mother,
"I will mention thy wants to the shepherds, and they will not deny it thee."
But she said,
"I am ashamed that these men should know that I longed."
"Nay, my daughter,"
said she,
"it is no shame but a virtue to long for such a thing as that."
So Mercy said,
"Then, mother, if you please, ask the shepherds if they are willing to sell it."
Now the glass was one of 1,000. They would present a man one way with his own features exactly, and turn it but another way, and it would show one the very face and likeness of the Prince of Pilgrims himself. Yea, I have talked with them that can tell, and they have said that they have seen the very crown of thorns upon his head by looking in that glass. They have therein also seen the holes in his hands, in his feet, and in his side. Yea, such an excellency is there in this glass, that it will show him to one where they have a mind to see him, whether living or dead, whether in earth or in heaven, whether in a state of lowliness or in his kingliness, whether coming to suffer or coming to reign. Christiana therefore went to the shepherds apart. Now the names of the shepherds were Knowledge, Experience, Watchful, and Sincere, and said unto them,
"There is one of my daughters, that I think doth long for something that she hath seen in this house, and she thinks that she shall be unhappy if she should by you be denied."
Call her, call her. She shall assuredly have what we can help her to.
So they called her, and said to her,
Mercy, what is that thing thou wouldst have?
Then she blushed, and said,
"The great glass that hangs up in the dining-room."
So Sincere ran and fetched it, and with a joyful consent it was given her. Then she bowed her head, and gave thanks, and said,
"By this I know that I have obtained favour in your eyes."
They also gave to the other young women such things as they desired, and to their husbands great praise, for that they joined with great heart to the slaying of giant Despair and the destroying of Doubting Castle. About Christiana's neck the shepherds put a necklace, and so they did about the necks of her 4 daughters. Also they put earrings in their ears, and jewels on their foreheads. When they were minded to go hence, they let them go in peace, but gave not to them those certain cautions which before were given to Christian and his companion. The reason was, for that these had Great-Heart to be their guide, who was one that was well acquainted with things, and so could give them their cautions more seasonably. That is, even then when the danger was nigh the approaching. What cautions Christian and his companion had received of the shepherds, they had also lost by that the time was come that they need to put them in practice. Wherefore here was the advantage that this company had over the other. From hence they went on singing, and they said,
"Behold, how fitly are the stages set, for their relief that pilgrims are become, and how they us receive without one let that make the other life our mark and home. What novelties they have to us they give, that we though pilgrims joyful lives may live. They do upon us too such things bestow that show we pilgrims are where'er we go."
When they were gone from the shepherds, they quickly came to the place where Christian met with one Turnaway, that dwelt in the town of Apostasy. Wherefore of him Mr. Great-Heart, their guide, did now put them in mind, saying,
This is the place where Christian met with one Turnaway, who carried with him the character of his rebellion at his back. And this I have to say concerning this man, he would hearken to no counsel, but once falling, persuasion could not stop him. When he came to the place where the cross and the sepulchre were, he did meet with one that bid him look there, but he gnashed with his teeth, and stamped, and said he was resolved to go back to his own town. Before he came to the gate, he met with Evangelist, who offered to lay hands on him, to turn him into the way again. But this Turnaway resisted him, and having done much harm unto him, he got away over the wall, and so escaped his hand.
Then they went on, and just at the place where little Faith formerly was robbed, there stood a man with his sword drawn, and his face all bloody. Then said Mr. Great-Heart,
Who art thou?
The man made answer, saying,
I am one whose name is Valiant-for-Truth. I am a pilgrim, and am going to the celestial city. Now, as I was in my way, there were 3 men did beset me, and propounded unto me these 3 things. 1, whether I would become one of them. 2, or go back to the place from whence I came. 3, or die upon the place. To the first I answered, I had been a true man a long season, and therefore it could not be expected that I should now cast in my lot with thieves. Then they demanded what I should say to the second. So I told them that the place from whence I came, had I not found it unsatisfactory, I had not forsaken at all. But, finding it altogether unsuitable to me, and very unprofitable for me, I forsook it for this way. Then they asked me what I said to the third. And I told them, my life cost more dear far than that I should lightly give it away. Besides, you have nothing to do thus, to put things to my choice, wherefore at your peril be it, if you meddle. Then these 3, to wit, Wildhead, Inconsiderate, and Pragmatic, drew their weapons upon me, and I also drew upon them. So we fell to it, 1 against 3, for the space of above 3 hours. They have left upon me, as you see, some marks of their valour, and have also carried away with them some of mine. They are but just now gone. I suppose they might, as the saying is, hear your horse dash, and so they betook them to flight.
But here was great odds, 3 against 1.
'Tis true, but little or more are nothing to him that has the truth on his side. Though an host should encamp against me, said one, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise against me, in this will I be confident. Besides,
said he,
I have read in some records that one man has fought an army, and how many did Samson slay with the jawbone of an ass?
Then said the guide,
Why did you not cry out, that some might have come in for your succour?
So I did, to my king, who, I knew, could hear me, and afford invisible help, and that was sufficient for me.
Then said Mr. Great-Heart to Mr. Valiant-for-Truth,
Thou hast worthily behaved thyself. Let me see thy sword.
So he showed it to him. When he had taken it in his hand, and looked thereon a while, he said,
Ha! It is a right Jerusalem blade.
It is so. Let a man have one of these blades, with a hand to wield it, and skill to use it, and he may venture upon an angel with it. He need not fear its holding, if he can but tell how to lay on. Its edges will never blunt. It will cut flesh and bones, and soul and spirit, and all.
But you fought a great while. I wonder you were not weary.
I fought till my sword did cleave to my hand, and when they were joined together, as if a sword grew out of my arm, and when the blood ran through my fingers, then I fought with most courage.
Thou hast done well. Thou hast resisted unto blood, striving against sin. Thou shalt abide by us. Come in and go out with us, for we are thy companions.
Then they took him, washed his wounds, and gave him of what they had to refresh him. And so they went on together. Now, as they went on, because Mr. Great-Heart was delighted in him, for he loved one greatly that he found to be a man of his own sort, and because there were in company them that were feeble and weak, therefore he questioned with him about many things, as first what countryman he was.
I am of Darkland, for there I was born, and there my father and mother are still.
Darkland,
said the guide.
Doth not that lie upon the same coast with the city of destruction?
Yes, it doth. Now, that which caused me to come on pilgrimage was this. We had one Mr. Teltrue come into our parts, and he told it about what Christian had done, that went from the city of destruction, namely, how he had forsaken his wife and children, and had betaken himself to a pilgrim's life. It was also reported and believed how he had killed a serpent that did come out to resist him in his journey, and how he got through to whither he intended. It was also told what welcome he had at all his lord's lodgings, specially when he came to the gates of the celestial city. For there, said the man, he was received with sound of trumpet by a company of shining ones. He told also how all the bells in the city did ring for joy at his entering in, and what golden garments he was clothed with many other things that now I shall forbear to relate. In a word, that man so told the story of Christian and his travels, that my heart fell into a burning haste to be gone after him, nor could father or mother stay me. So I got from them, and am come thus far on my way.
You came in at the gate, did you not?
Yes, yes. For the same man also told us that all would be nothing if we did not begin to enter this way at the gate.
Look you,
said the guide to Christiana,
the pilgrimage of your husband, with what he has gotten thereby, is spread abroad far and near.
Why, is this Christian's wife?
Yes, that it is, and these also are his 4 sons.
What, and going on pilgrimage too?
Yes, verily, they are following after.
It glads me at heart. Good man, how joyful will he be when he shall see them that would not go with him, yet to enter after him in at the gates into the city.
Without doubt it will be a comfort to him, for next to the joy of seeing himself there, it will be a joy to meet there his wife and children.
But, now you are upon that, pray let me hear your opinion about it. Some make a question whether we shall know one another when we are there.
Do they think they shall know themselves, then, or that they shall rejoice to see themselves in that happiness? And if they think they shall know and do this, why not know others, and rejoice in their welfare also? Again, since relations are our second self, though that state will cease there, yet why may it not be wisely concluded that we shall be more glad to see them there than to see they are wanting?
Well, I perceive whereabouts you are as to this. Have you any more things to ask me about my beginning to come on pilgrimage?
Yes. Were your father and mother willing that you should become a pilgrim?
Oh, no. They used all means imaginable to persuade me to stay at home.
Why, what could they say against it?
They said it was an idle life, and if I myself were not inclined to sloth and laziness, I would never favour a pilgrim's condition.
And what did they say else?
Why, they told me that it was a dangerous way. Yea, the most dangerous way in the world, said they, is that which the pilgrims go.
Did they show you wherein this way is so dangerous?
Yes, and that in many particulars.
Name some of them.
They told me of the Slough of Despond, where Christian was well nigh smothered. They told me that there were archers standing ready in Beelzebub's castle, to shoot them who should knock at the wicket gate for entrance. They told me also of the wood and dark mountains of the hill Difficulty, of the lions, and also of the 3 giants, Bloody Man, Maul, and Slaygood. They said, moreover, that there was a foul fiend haunted the valley of humiliation, and that Christian was by him almost bereft of life. Besides, said they, you must go over the valley of the shadow of death, where the hobgoblins are, where the light is darkness, where the way is full of snares, pits, traps, and gins. They told me also of giant despair, of Doubting Castle, and of the ruin that the pilgrims met with there. Further, they said I must go over the enchanted ground, which was dangerous, and that, after all this, I should find a river, over which I should find no bridge, and that that river did lie betwixt me and the celestial country.
And was this all?
No, they also told me that this way was full of deceivers, and of persons that laid wait there, to turn good men out of the path.
But how did they make that out?
They told me that Mr. Worldly Wise Man did lie there in wait to deceive. They also said that there were formality and hypocrisy continually on the road. They said also that by-ends, talkative, or Demas, would go near to gather me up, that the flatterer would catch me in his net, or that, with green-headed ignorance, I would presume to go on to the gate, from whence he was sent back to the hole that was in the side of the hill, and made to go the byway to hell.
I promise you this was enough to discourage you, but did they make an end here?
No, stay. They told me also of many that had tried that way of old, and that had gone a great way therein, to see if they could find something of the glory there, that so many had so much talked of from time to time, and how they came back again, and befooled themselves for setting a foot out of doors in that path, to the satisfaction of all the country. And they named several that did so, as obstinate and pliable, mistrust and timorous, turn away and old atheist, with several more who, they said, had some of them gone far to see what they could find, but not one of them found so much advantage by going as amounted to the weight of a feather.
Said they anything more to discourage you?
Yes, they told me of one Mr. Fearing, who was a pilgrim, and how he found this way so solitary, that he never had a comfortable hour therein. Also that Mr. Despondency had like to have been starved therein. Yea, and also, which I had almost forgot, that Christian himself, about whom there had been such a noise, after all his ventures for a celestial crown, was certainly drowned in the Black River, and never went a foot farther, however it was smothered up.
And did none of these things discourage you?
No, they seemed but as so many nothings to me.
How came that about?
Why, I still believed what Mr. Telltrue had said, and that carried me beyond them all.
Then this was your victory, even your faith.
It was so. I believed, and therefore came out, got into the way, fought all that set themselves against me, and, by believing, am come to this place. Who would true valour see, let him come hither. One here will constant be, come wind, come weather. There's no discouragement shall make him once relent his first avowed intent to be a pilgrim. Whoso beset him round with dismal stories, do but themselves confound, his strength the more is. No lion can him fright, he'll with a giant fight, but he will have a right to be a pilgrim. Hobgoblin nor foul fiend can daunt his spirit. He knows he at the end shall life inherit. Then fancies fly away, he'll fear not what men say. He'll labour night and day to be a pilgrim.
End of Part 2, Chapter 8. The Pilgrim's Progress, Part 2, Chapter 9. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Pilgrim's Progress, by John Bunyan, Part 2, Chapter 9. The Enchanted Ground. By this time they were got to the enchanted ground, where the air naturally tended to make one drowsy, and that place was all grown over with briars and thorns, excepting here and there, where there was an enchanted arbour, upon which if a man sits, or in which if a man sleeps, it is a question, some say, whether ever he shall rise or wake again in this world. Over this forest, therefore, they went, both one and another, and Mr. Great-Heart went before, for that he was the guide, and Mr. Valiant-for-Truth came behind, being rear guard, for fear lest, peradventure, some fiend, or dragon, or giant, or thief should fall upon their rear, and so do mischief. They went on here, each man with his sword drawn in his hand, for they knew it was a dangerous place. Also they cheered up one another as well as they could. Feeble-Mind Mr. Great-Heart commanded should come up after him, and Mr. Despondency was under the eye of Mr. Valiant. Now they had not gone far, but a great mist and darkness fell upon them all, so that they could scarce for a great while see the one the other, wherefore they were forced for some time to feel for one another by words, for they walked not by sight. But any one must think that here was but sorry going for the best of them all, but how much worse for the women and children, who both of feet and heart were but tender. Yet so it was that through the encouraging words of him that led in the front, they made a pretty good shift to wag along. The way also was here very wearisome through dirt and slabbiness, nor was there on all this ground so much as one inn or victualling house, therein to refresh the feebler sort. Here, therefore, was grunting and puffing and sighing. While one tumbleth over a brush, another sticks fast in the dirt, and the children, some of them, lost their shoes in the mire. While one cries, "I am down," and another, "Ho, where are you?" and a third, "The bushes have got such fast hold on me, I think I cannot get away from them." Then they came at an arbour, warm, and promising much refreshing to the pilgrims, for it was finely wrought above head, beautified with greens, furnished with benches and settles. It also had in it a soft couch, wherein the weary might lean. This, you must think, all things considered, was tempting, for the pilgrims already began to be foiled with the badness of the way, but there was not one of them that made so much as a motion to stop there. Yea, for aught I could perceive, they continually gave so good heed to the advice of their guide, and he did so faithfully tell them of dangers, and of the nature of dangers when they were at them, that usually, when they were nearest to them, they did most pluck up their spirits and hearten one another to deny the flesh. This arbour was called the Slothful's Friend on purpose to allure, if it might be, some of the pilgrims there to take up their rest when weary. I saw then in my dream that they went on in this their solitary ground till they came to a place at which a man is apt to lose his way. Now, though when it was light their guide could well enough tell how to miss those ways that led wrong, yet in the dark he was put to a stand. But he had in his pocket a map of all ways leading to and from the celestial city, wherefore he struck a light, for he also never goes without his tinder-box, and takes a view of his book or map, which bids him be careful in that place to turn to the right-hand way. And had he not been careful to look in his map, they had in all probability been smothered in the mud, for just a little before them, and that at the end of the cleanest way too, was a pit, none knows how deep, full of nothing but mud, there made on purpose to destroy the pilgrims in. Then thought I with myself, who that goeth on pilgrimage but would have one of those maps about him, that he may look, when he is at a stand, which is the way he must take? They went on then in this enchanted ground till they came to where was another arbour, and it was built by the highway side. And in that arbour there lay two men, whose names were Heedless and Too Bold. These two went thus far on pilgrimage, but here, being wearied with their journey, they sat down to rest themselves, and so fell fast asleep. When the pilgrims saw them, they stood still and shook their heads, for they knew that the sleepers were in a pitiful case. Then they consulted what to do, whether to go on and leave them in their sleep, or to step to them and try to awake them. So they concluded to go to them and wake them, that is, if they could. But with this caution, namely, to take heed that themselves did not sit down, nor embrace the offered benefit of that arbour. So they went in, and spake to the men, and called each one by his name, for the guide, it seems, did know them. But there was no voice or answer. Then the guide did shake them, and do what he could to disturb them. Then said one of them,
"I will pay you when I take my money."
At which the guide shook his head.
"I will fight so long as I can hold my sword in my hand,"
said the other. At that one of the children laughed. Then said Christiana,
"What is the meaning of this?"
The guide said,
"They talk in their sleep. If you strike them, beat them, or whatever else you do to them, they will answer you after this fashion, or as one of them said in old time, when the waves of the sea did beat upon them, and he slept as one upon the mast of a ship, When shall I awake? I will seek it yet again. You know, when men talk in their sleep, they say anything, but their words are not governed either by faith or reason. There is an unsuitableness in their words now, as there was before betwixt their going on pilgrimage and sitting down there. This, then, is the mischief of it. When heedless ones go on pilgrimage, 'tis 20 to 1, but they are served thus. For this enchanted ground is one of the last refuges that the enemy to pilgrims has. Wherefore it is, as you see, placed almost at the end of the way, and so it standeth against us with the more advantage. For when, thinks the enemy, will these fools be so desirous to sit down as when they are weary? And when so like to be weary as when almost at their journey's end? Therefore it is, I say, that the enchanted ground is placed so near to the land of Beulah, and so near the end of their race. Wherefore let pilgrims look to themselves, lest it happen to them, as it has done to these, that, as you see, are fallen asleep, and none can wake them.
Then the pilgrims desired, with trembling, to go forward. Only they prayed their guide to strike a light, that they might go the rest of their way by the help of the light of a lantern. So he struck a light, and they went by the help of that through the rest of this way, though the darkness was very great. But the children began to be sorely weary, and they cried out to him that loveth pilgrims to make their way more comfortable. So, by that they had gone a little farther, a wind arose that drove away the fog, so the air became more clear. Yet they were not off by much of the enchanted ground, only now they could see one another better, and the way wherein they should walk. Now, when they were almost at the end of this ground, they perceived that a little before them was a solemn noise, as of one that was much concerned. So they went on, and looked before them. And behold, they saw, as they thought, a man upon his knees, with hands and eyes lift up, and speaking, as they thought, earnestly to one that was above. They drew nigh, but could not tell what he said. So they went softly till he had done. When he had done, he got up, and began to run towards the celestial city. Then Mr. Great-Heart called after him, saying,
So ho, friend, let us have your company, if you go, as I suppose you do, to the celestial city.
So the man stopped, and they came up to him. But as soon as Mr. Honest saw him, he said,
I know this man.
Then said Mr. Valiant-for-Truth,
Prithee, who is it?
It is one,
said he,
that comes from whereabout I dwelt. His name is Steadfast. He is certainly a right good pilgrim.
So they came up one to another, and presently Standfast said to Old Honest,
Hey, Father Honest, are you there?
Aye,
said he,
that I am, as sure as you are there.
Right glad am I,
said Mr. Standfast,
that I have found you on this road.
And as glad am I,
said the other,
that I espied you upon your knees.
Then Mr. Standfast blushed, and said,
But why, did you see me?
Yes, that I did,
quoth the other,
and with my heart was glad at the sight.
Why, what did you think?
said Standfast.
Think?
said Old Honest.
What should I think? I thought we had an honest man upon the road, and therefore should have his company by and by.
If you thought not amiss,
said Standfast,
how happy am I! But if I be not as I should, I alone must bear it.
That is true,
said the other.
But your fear doth further show me that things are right betwixt the Prince of Pilgrims and your soul. For he saith, Blessed is the man that feareth always.
Well, but brother, I pray thee, tell us what was it that was the cause of thy being upon thy knees even now? Was it for that some special mercy laid upon thee, the need of prayer, or how?
Why, we are, as you see, upon the enchanted ground. And as I was coming along, I was musing with myself of what a dangerous road the road in this place was, and how many that had come even thus far on pilgrimage had here been stopped and been destroyed. I thought also of the manner of the death with which this place destroyeth men. Those that die here die of no violent, painful disease. The death which such die is not grievous to them, for he that goeth away in such a sleep begins that journey with desire and pleasure. Yea, such sink into the will of that disease.
Then Mr. Honest, interrupting of him, said,
Did you see the two men asleep in the arbour?
Ay, I saw Heedless and Too Bold there, and for aught I know, there they will lie till they rot. But let me go on in my tale. As I was thus musing, as I said, there was one in very pleasant attire, but old, who presented herself to me, and offered me 3 things, to wit, her body, her purse, and her bed. Now, the truth is, I was both aweary and sleepy. I am also as poor as an owlet, and that perhaps the witch knew. Well, I repulsed her once or twice, but she put by my repulses and smiled. Then I began to be angry, but she mattered that nothing at all. Then she made offers again, and said, if I would be ruled by her, she would make me great and happy. For, said she, I am the mistress of the world, and men are made happy by me. Then I asked her name, and she told me it was Madam Bubble. This set me farther from her, but she still followed me with enticements. Then I betook me, as you saw, to my knees, and with hands lift up, and cries, I prayed to him that had said he would help. So, just as you came up, the gentlewoman went her way. Then I continued to give thanks for this my great deliverance. For I verily believe she intended no good, but rather sought to make stop of me in my journey.
Without doubt her designs were bad. But stay, now you talk of her, methinks I either have seen her, or have read some story of her.
Perhaps you have done both.
Madam Bubble? Is she not a tall, comely dame, somewhat of a swarthy complexion?
Right, you hit it. She is just such a one.
Does she not speak very smoothly, and give you a smile at the end of a sentence?
You fall right upon it again, for these are her very actions.
Doth she not wear a great purse by her side, and is not her hand often in it, fingering her money, as if that was her heart's delight?
'Tis just so. Had she stood by all this while, you could not more amply have set her forth before me, nor have better described her features.
Then he that drew her picture was a good artist, and he that wrote of her said true.
The woman is a witch, and it is by virtue of her witchcraft that this ground is enchanted. Whoever doth lay his head down in her lap had as good lay it down upon that block over which the axe doth hang. And whoever lay their eyes upon her beauty are accounted the enemies of God. This is she that maintaineth in their splendour all those that are the enemies of pilgrims. Yea, this is she that hath bought off many a man from a pilgrim's life. She is a great gossiper. She is always, both she and her daughters, at one pilgrim's heels or other, now commanding, and then preferring the excellencies of this life. She is a bold and impudent creature. She will talk with any man. She always laugheth poor pilgrims to scorn, but highly commends the rich. If there be one cunning to get money in a place, she will speak well of him from house to house. She loveth banqueting and feasting mainly well. She is always at one full table or another. She has given it out in some places that she is a goddess, and therefore some do worship her. She has her times and open places of cheating, and she will say and avow it, that none can show a good comparable to hers. She promiseth to dwell with children's children, and if they will but love her and make much of her, she will cast out of her purse gold like dust in some places and to some persons. She loves to be sought after, spoken well of, and to lie in the bosoms of men. She is never weary of praising her gifts, and she loves them most that think best of her. She will promise to some crowns and kingdoms, if they will but take her advice. Yet many hath she brought to the halter, and 10,000 times more to hell.
Oh, what a mercy it is that I did resist her, for whither might she have drawn me?
Whither? Nay, none but God knows whither. But in general, to be sure, she would have drawn thee into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and ruin. 'Twas she that set Absalom against his father, and Jeroboam against his master. 'Twas she that persuaded Judas to sell his Lord, and that prevailed with Damas to forsake the godly pilgrim's life. None can tell of the mischief that she doth. She makes variance betwixt rulers and subjects, betwixt parents and children, betwixt neighbour and neighbour, betwixt a man and his wife, betwixt a man and himself, betwixt the flesh and the heart. Wherefore, good master, stand fast, be as your name is, and when you have done all, stand.
At this course there was among the pilgrims a mixture of joy and trembling, but at length they brake out, and sang,
What danger is the pilgrim in? How many are his foes? How many ways there are to sin no living mortal knows.
Some of the ditch shy are, yet can lie tumbling in the mire. Some, though they shun the frying pan, do leap into the fire.
End of Part 2, Chapter 9. The Pilgrim's Progress, Part 2, Chapter 10. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Pilgrim's Progress, by John Bunyan, Part 2, Chapter 10. The Pilgrims at Home. After this I beheld until they were come into the land of Beulah, where the sun shineth night and day. Here, because they were weary, they betook themselves a while to rest. And because this country was common for pilgrims, and because the orchards and vineyards that were here belonged to the king of the celestial country, therefore they were permitted to make bold with any of his things. But a little while soon refreshed them here, for the bells did so ring, and the trumpets continually sound so melodiously, that they could not sleep, and yet they received as much refreshing as if they had slept their sleep never so soundly. Here also the noise of them that walked in the streets was,
More pilgrims are come to town.
And another would answer, saying,
And so many went over the water, and were let in at the golden gates today.
They would cry again,
There is now a legion of shining ones just come to the town, by which we know that there are more pilgrims upon the road, for here they come to wait for them and comfort them after all their sorrow.
Then the pilgrims got up and walked to and fro, but how their ears now filled with heavenly voices, and their eyes delighted with celestial visions! In this land they heard nothing, saw nothing, felt nothing, smelt nothing, tasted nothing that was offensive to their stomach or mind. Only when they tasted of the water of the river over which they were to go, they thought that it tasted a little bitterish to the palate, but it proved sweeter when it was down. In this place there was a record kept of the names of them that had been pilgrims of old, and a history of all the famous acts that they had done. It was here also much spoken of how the river to some had had its flowings, and what ebbings it had had while others have gone over. It has been in a manner dry for some, while it has overflowed its banks for others. In this place the children of the town would go into the king's gardens and gather nosegays for the pilgrims, and bring them to them with much affection. Here also grew camphor, with spikenard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, and with all the trees of frankincense, myrrh, and aloes, with all chief spices. With these the pilgrims' chambers were perfumed while they stayed here, and with these their bodies anointed, to prepare them to go over the river, when the time appointed was come. Now, while they lay there and waited for the good hour, there was a noise in the town that there was a messenger come from the celestial city, with matter of great importance to one Christiana, the wife of Christian the pilgrim. So inquiry was made for her, and the house was found out where she was. So the messenger presented her with a letter, the contents whereof were,
Hail, good woman! I bring thee tidings that the Master calleth for thee, and expecteth that thou shouldst stand in his presence in clothes of everlasting life within these 10 days.
When he had read this letter to her, he gave her therewith a sure token that he was a true messenger, and was come to bid her make haste to be gone. The token was an arrow with a point sharpened with love, let easily into her heart, which by degrees wrought so effectually with her, that at the time appointed she must be gone. When Christiana saw that her time was come, and that she was the first of this company that was to go over, she called for Mr. Great-Heart, her guide, and told him how matters were. So he told her he was heartily glad of the news, and could have been glad had the post come for him. Then she bid that he should give advice how all things should be prepared for her journey. So he told her, saying,
Thus and thus it must be, and we that are left will accompany you to the riverside.
Then she called for her children, and gave them her blessing, and told them that she yet read with comfort the mark that was set in their foreheads, and was glad to see them with her there, and that they had kept their garments so white. Lastly, she gave to the poor that little she had, and commanded her sons and daughters to be ready against the messenger should come for them. When she had spoken these words to her guide and to her children, she called for Mr. Valiant-for-Truth, and said unto him,
Sir, you have in all places shown yourself true-hearted. Be faithful unto death, and my king will give you a crown of life. I would also entreat you to have an eye to my children, and if at any time you see them faint, speak comfortably to them. For my daughters, my sons' wives, they have been faithful, and a fulfilling of the promise upon them will be their end.
But she gave Mr. Standfast a ring. Then she called for old Mr. Honest, and said of him,
Behold an Israelite indeed, in whom is no guile.
Then said he,
I wish you a fair day when you set out for Mount Zion, and shall be glad to see that you go over the river dry-shod.
But she answered,
Come wet, come dry, I long to be gone. For however the weather is in my journey, I shall have time enough when I come there to sit down and rest and dry me.
Then came in that good man, Mr. Ready-to-halt, to see her. So she said to him,
Thy travel hitherto has been with difficulty, but that will make thy rest the sweeter. But watch and be ready, for at an hour when you think not, the messenger may come.
After him came in Mr. Despondency and his daughter Much Afraid, to whom she said,
You ought with thankfulness for ever to remember your deliverance from the hands of Giant Despair, and out of Doubting Castle. The effect of that mercy is that you are brought with safety hither. Be ye watchful, and cast away fear. Be sober, and hope to the end.
Then she said to Mr. Feeble-mind,
Thou wast delivered from the mouth of Giant Slaygood, that thou mightest live in the light of the living for ever, and see thy king with comfort. Only I advise thee to turn thee of thy aptness, to fear and doubt of his goodness, before he sends for thee, lest thou shouldst, when he comes, be forced to stand before him for that fault with blushing.
Now the day drew on that Christiana must be gone. So the road was full of people to see her take her journey. But behold, all the banks beyond the river were full of horses and chariots, which were come down from above to accompany her to the city gate. So she came forth and entered the river, with a beckon of farewell to those that followed her to the riverside. The last words that she was heard to say were,
I come, Lord, to be with thee, and bless thee.
So her children and friends returned to their place, for that those that waited for Christiana had carried her out of their sight. So she went and called, and entered in at the gates with all the tokens of joy that her husband Christian had done before her. At her departure her children wept, but Mr. Great-Heart and Mr. Valiant played upon the well-tuned cymbal and harp for joy. So all departed to their respective places. In process of time there came a messenger to the town again, and his business was with Mr. Ready-to-halt. So he inquired him out, and said to him,
I am come to thee from him whom thou hast loved and followed, though upon crutches, and my message is to tell thee that he expects thee at his table to sup with him in his kingdom the next day after Easter. Wherefore prepare thyself for this journey.
Then he also gave him a token that he was a true messenger, saying,
I have broken thy golden bowl and loosed thy silver cord.
After this Mr. Ready-to-halt called for his fellow pilgrims and told them, saying,
I am sent for, and God shall surely visit you also.
So he desired Mr. Valiant to make his will, and because he had nothing to bequeath to them that should survive him but his crutches and his good wishes, therefore thus he said,
These crutches I bequeath to my son, that shall tread in my step, with 100 warm wishes, that he may prove better than I have done.
Then he thanked Mr. Goodhart for his conduct and kindness, and so addressed himself to his journey. When he came to the brink of the river, he said,
Now I shall have no more need of these crutches, since yonder are chariots and horses for me to ride on.
The last words he was heard to say were,
Welcome, life.
So he went his way. After this, Mr. Feeble-Mind had tidings brought him that the messenger sounded his horn at his chamber door. Then he came in and told him, saying,
I am come to tell thee that thy master has need of thee, and that in a very little time thou must behold his face in brightness. And take this as a token of the truth of my message. Those that look out at the windows shall be darkened.
Then Mr. Feeble-Mind called for his friends, and told them what errand had been brought unto him, and what token he had received of the truth of the message. Then he said,
Since I have nothing to bequeath to any, to what purpose should I make a will? As for my feeble mind, that I will leave behind me, for that I shall have no need of in the place whither I go, nor is it worth bestowing upon the poorest pilgrim. Wherefore, when I am gone, I desire that you, Mr. Valiant, would bury it in a dunghill.
This done, and the day being come on which he was to depart, he entered the river as the rest. His last words were,
Hold out, faith and patience.
So he went over to the other side. When days had many of them passed away, Mr. Despondency was sent for a messenger was come, and brought this message to him.
Trembling man, these are to summon thee to be ready with thy king by the next Lord's Day, to shout for joy for thy deliverance from all thy doubtings, and,
said the messenger,
that my message is true, take this for proof.
So he gave the grasshopper to be a burden unto him. Now Mr. Despondency's daughter, whose name was Much Afraid, said when she heard what was done, that she would go with her father. Then Mr. Despondency said to his friends,
Myself and my daughter, you know what we have been, and how troublesomely we have behaved ourselves in every company. My will and my daughter's is, that our discouraged feelings and slavish fears be by no man received, from the day of our departure for ever. For I know that after my death they will offer themselves to others. For, to be plain with you, they are ghosts the which we entertained when we first began to the Pilgrims, and could never shake them off after. And they will walk about and seek entertainment of the Pilgrims, but for our sakes shut ye the doors upon them.
When the time was come for them to depart, they went to the brink of the river. The last words of Mr. Despondency were,
Farewell, night. Welcome, day.
His daughter went through the river singing, but none could understand what she said. Then it came to pass, a while after, that there was a messenger in the town that inquired for Mr. Honest. So he came to his house where he was, and delivered to his hand these lines.
Thou art commanded to be ready against this day 7 night, to present thyself before thy lord at his father's house. And for a token that my message is true, all thy daughters of music shall be brought low.
Then Mr. Honest called for his friends, and said unto them,
I die, but shall make no will. As for my honesty, it shall go with me. Let them that come after me be told this.
When the day that he was to be gone was come, he prepared himself to go over the river. Now the river at that time overflowed its banks in some places, but Mr. Honest in his lifetime had spoken to one good conscience to meet him there, the which also he did, and lent him his hand, and so helped him over. The last words of Mr. Honest were,
Grace reigns.
So he left the world. After this, it was noised abroad that Mr. Valiant-for-Truth was taken with a summons by the same messenger as the other, and had this for a token that the summons was true, that his pitcher was broken at the fountain. When he understood it, he called for his friends, and told them of it. Then said he,
I am going to my father's, and though with great difficulty I am got hither, yet now I do not repent me of all the trouble I have been at, to arrive where I am. My sword I give to him that shall succeed me in my pilgrimage, and my courage and skill to him that can get it. My marks and scars I carry with me, to be a witness for me that I have fought his battles, who now will be my rewarder.
When the day that he must go hence was come, many accompanied him to the riverside, into which, as he went, he said,
Death, where is thy sting?
And as he went down deeper, he said,
Grave, where is thy victory?
So he passed over, and all the trumpets sounded for him on the other side. Then there came forth a summons for Mr. Standfast. This Mr. Standfast was he whom the pilgrims found upon his knees in the enchanted ground, for the messenger brought it him open in his hands. The contents thereof were, that he must prepare for a change of life, for his master was not willing that he should be so far from him any longer. At this Mr. Standfast was put into a muse.
Nay,
said the messenger,
ye need not doubt the truth of my message, for here is a token of the truth thereof. Thy wheel is broken at the cistern.
Then he called to him Mr. Great-Heart, who was their guide, and said unto him,
Sir, although it was not my hap to be much in your good company in the days of my pilgrimage, yet since the time I knew you, you have been profitable to me. When I came from home, I left behind me a wife and 5 small children. Let me entreat you at your return, for I know that you will go and return to your master's house, in hopes that you may yet be a conductor to more of the holy pilgrims, that you will send to my family, and let them be acquainted with all that hath or shall happen unto me. Tell them, moreover, of my happy arrival to this place, and of the present and late blessed condition that I am in. Tell them also of Christian and Christiana his wife, and how she and her children came after her husband. Tell them also what a happy end she made, and whither she has gone. I have little or nothing to send to my family, unless it be my prayers and tears for them, of which it will suffice that you acquaint them, if peradventure they may prevail.
When Mr. Standfast had thus set things in order, and the time being come for him to haste him away, he also went down to the river. Now there was a great calm at that time in the river, wherefore Mr. Standfast, when he was about half-way in, stood a while, and talked to his companions that had waited upon him thither. And he said,
This river has been a terror to many, yea, the thoughts of it have also frighted me. But now, methinks, I stand easy, my foot is fixed upon that on which the feet of the priests that bare the ark of the covenant stood, while Israel went over Jordan. The waters indeed are to the palate bitter, and to the stomach cold, yet the thought of what I am going to, and of the conduct that waits for me on the other side, doth lie as a glowing coal at my heart. I see myself now at the end of my journey. My toilsome days are ended. I am going to see that head which was crowned with thorns, and that face which was spit upon for me. I have formerly lived by hearsay and faith, but now I go where I shall live by sight, and shall be with him in whose company I delight myself. I have loved to hear my Lord spoken of, and wherever I have seen the print of his shoe in the earth, there have I coveted to set my foot too. His name has been to me as a perfume box, yea, sweeter than all sweet smells. His voice to me has been most sweet, and his countenance I have more desired than they that have most desired the light of the sun. His word I did use to gather for my food, and for medicine against my faintings. He has held me, and hath kept me from my sins. Yea, my steps hath he strengthened in his way.
Now while he was thus speaking, his countenance changed, his strong man bowed under him, and after he had said,
Take me, for I come unto thee,
he ceased to be seen of them. But glorious it was to see how the open region was filled with horses and chariots, with trumpeters and pipers, with singers and players on stringed instruments, to welcome the pilgrims as they went up, and followed one another in at the beautiful gates of the city. As for Christian's children, the 4 boys that Christiana brought with her, with their wives and children, I did not stay where I was till they were gone over. Also, since I came away, I heard one say that they were yet alive, and so would be for the help of the church in that place where they were for a time. Shall it be my lot to go that way again, I may give those that desire it an account of what I here am silent about. Meantime, I bid my reader adieu. End of Part 2, Chapter 10. End of Pilgrim's Progress, by John Bunyan.